and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst, the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency specializing in editing, marketing, and strategy. Today is a very special episode. We're almost to 100 episodes, which is so exciting. Be sure that you're following me on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production because I will be posting a special post just for 100 episodes. I am so excited to reach 100. I know I talked about this before, but a lot of podcasts stop after 10 episodes just because of consistency and their vision long term. So reaching 100 episodes is a huge milestone that I've been looking forward to for a while. So more on that to come. But today we have an awesome guest. Her name is Felly Day, and she is a content strategist who prioritizes freedom. So she helps entrepreneurs see that they don't have to do it all alone and that it's okay to loosen the reins a little. So Felly helps businesses figure out how they can strategically repurpose their content because as entrepreneurs, we have so much content that sometimes we don't maximize. So this episode will be really, really helpful for anyone who's looking to do business and marketing more strategically with repurposing. Felly is also the host of the Unprofessional Entrepreneur podcast, which that is a whole fun concept in itself. She talks about just having freedom to show up as yourself, and we'll get more into that in this episode. If you have any questions for Felly or I, make sure you check out the links in the show notes, but let's get right into this episode. Hey, Felly, thank you so much for joining me on the Employee to Boss podcast. I am so excited to be talking with you today.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so you are, I think, my first guest that lives in France, so that is very exciting. I don't know if there's many people who are listening to this podcast from that region, but, maybe it'll introduce the podcast to some folks near you.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anyone living in France, please let me know because I only know French people.
I love that. So, Felly, I would love it if you could start off by telling us about yourself, what you do, and kind of your journey from employee to what you do now.
Let's start at the beginning. I come from a hospitality background. I worked ski seasons and I worked in hotels. I'm from Canada, so I worked in Vancouver, and then I moved to Banff, Alberta, a very popular tourist destination because I like the seasonal life. And then I continued working hospitality. I went to Australia on a working holiday visa, and then I went back to Vancouver and continued. But so I don't like the cold and knew that I needed out of the cold and that I couldn't live in a cold country the rest of my life. And Vancouver happens to be the warmest part of Canada, and it's not warm. So I basically started my business as a way to get myself out of my own country so I could live in the sun year round. And now I run a content repurposing agency and I mentor people one-on-one in marketing for fun.
I love that. And I love that entrepreneurship can really get you where you want to be. Like you didn't want to be in the cold. And so now you have a business where you can move anywhere. That is awesome. So content repurposing is a big topic. And I know that a lot of people think about it a lot. So, I'm a podcast producer and I encourage all of my clients to have video podcasts so they can repurpose it in many different ways from there. But for anyone who's coming and starting to think about content repurposing or like how to do it, why they should do it, can you give us a little bit of background of what it is and how people can start doing it?
Of course. So I always say that repurposing is not copy pasting. It is not taking your Instagram post and copy pasting it into an email. Like that's just redistribution at the end of the day. Repurposing is where you actually take something and give it a new purpose. So if you take a video podcast and then you write a blog post from it, or you create a carousel from it, or you write an email, like turning it into a new format of content as well as a new platform, and then doing things like changing the intention. So maybe the podcast is to educate people, where the Instagram reel is to generate leads and the email is to sell. So like there's so many different ways you can repurpose, and I would love to see people repurposing in more ways than just copy pasting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that probably is a big misconception of like, it's not just putting it in a million different places. It's really having different purposes for each of those. So for anyone starting to do this, what advice do you have for making that happen?
I mean, like the tried and true, you do not need to be on every single platform. It is like, as someone who repurposes content, I don't recommend it. It just ends up washing down your content, and it's way better to start with one and work your way up. I think that everybody should use email, right? So it's like, start with the social media, add an email. Once you're capable, like have your system with those two, then add in a third, then add in a fourth, like so on and so on. But I think content is such an experimental, creative outlet at the end of the day that maybe right now it's Instagram, maybe later it's LinkedIn, maybe it's YouTube, and you just ditch the social media entirely, right? And making sure that you don't think you have to be on a platform if you're not actually loving it.
That's big. I think that a lot of people think that to reach the right audience, they do have to be everywhere. So how can maybe someone figure out what the best platform for them is?
I think the best way to do anything in business is to just experiment. Like, give yourself 30 days, give yourself 90 days, test it out, and see, like, at the end of the 90 days, were you actually enjoying creating that content, or were you really like forcing yourself to put it out there? Did you struggle to come up with ideas, or like you didn't like getting on video and you constantly like felt like high anxiety and you were forcing yourself to do it? Like, okay, next, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So this is very niche what you do. I would love to hear,
Mm.
like, how did you decide content repurposing was going to be your business?
It's funny because I always like kind of explain it backwards. I started as a content writer,
Mhm.
and like it was mostly like a general VA, and I got a lot of content writing gigs. And then I just really struggled with people being like, I want a group of 12 posts per month, and me being like, about what? Like, what do you want me to write about for you? Like, if I just pull things out of the hat, it won't sound like you because it's me making it up, right? And so I started asking people, like, give me examples of a favorite post, or like give me like the sales page of what you want to be talking about this month, right? And it was like, as I started doing that, I found people who talked about content repurposing, and I was like, oh, that's literally what I'm already doing. And then it just went from there, that I was like, I'm no longer doing content writing, I'm only doing content repurposing, because I just like honestly got super annoyed with content writing, because you get like blank slates every month with no direction. So I ended up just kind of going all in on it, and then it built into an agency, and then it became what it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So tell me about who you work with. It sounds like, you're creating content for your clients. What type of clients do you typically work with?
So the agency has two offers. One is like it's not really a done with you. It's almost like a VIP day, but it's almost like a click to buy, like one-off thing, that my clients send me 10 links to existing content. I send them back 100 ideas. It's called the remix. And then the other offer is Repurposing Unlimited. And that's like the done for you content, where we do 10 hours of repurposed content a month based on the platforms they want to be on, the content they want to send us. We create as much content as possible. So within those two containers, I'd say we still end up with like pretty similar clients. But I think the remix is more people who either already have a team and they just need help like with the ideas of what to repurpose, or they don't have a team at all but aren't ready to invest in full done for you. So I found that I've had more service providers actually in the remix, where in Repurposing Unlimited and the done for you content, I've literally worked with like everyone under the sun. Like we're working with a magazine, we worked with a lot of coaches, with service providers, with all of them. But always like service-based businesses.
Well, that makes sense because there's only so many hours in the day. And if you're serving a bunch of clients, sometimes, and I find this for a lot of business owners, we kind of work on our own business last and kind of neglect maybe what we need to do. And so we're like for our own businesses, just like we're so busy. So that makes sense that they need help with repurposing and creating content. So what are some of like the easiest pieces to start with when someone's thinking about repurposing? Like, would it be a podcast? Would it be a blog post, an Instagram live?
I think the most important thing if you want to start repurposing is figuring out what is your core content. And by core content, I mean the type of content that you like to create the most. Because ideally, it'll be the long form content. Ideally, it'll be the video or the podcast, right? But like, if you don't enjoy creating that, then, well, I'm going to say you shouldn't be on that platform at all. But like, you know, it's going to be harder for you to have that as the top part of your like content creation pyramid, right? Because you don't enjoy creating it. So if you like creating Instagram carousels and you go like all out in depth on those Instagram carousels, then stick to that. And you can use those as the blog post outline. You can use those to make the emails that you then write. You can use those to repurpose into LinkedIn captions or wherever else you're showing up. It doesn't have to be a long form content. It just matters like, what do you actually enjoy creating and what are you actually going to consistently continue to create, even if you end up handing off everything else to someone to repurpose for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you, because you're also a mentor, correct? Like a marketing mentor. Is this something that you help your clients with, like seeing their one piece of content from different perspectives?
Yeah, I definitely feel like as a marketing mentor, we talk a lot about the platforms you're showing up on. And a lot of the times it is people who are like, oh, well, I need to be on LinkedIn because I heard really good things about LinkedIn. And I heard like there's lots of clients ready to buy on LinkedIn. And it's like, but everyone hates being on LinkedIn. No one actually likes engaging on LinkedIn. And so then you're not actually getting clients from LinkedIn. So what's the point in posting 3 times a week if you've never signed a client from that platform over the last 2 years? Right. Yeah. So it's like we do end up having that conversation of like what's actually lighting you up and what's actually producing the results. And if they're not the same thing, like we need to figure something out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was me with Pinterest. I heard such about Pinterest. I was trying so hard and I was getting followers on there, but absolutely no conversion for me. I know it works for other people, but I was like, this is not my best time that I could spend somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to looking at one piece of content from different perspectives, how do you do that? Like, how do you sit down and like see, let's say this podcast episode, how would you then turn it into different pieces?
I would ask you, what platforms do you want to be showing up on? So if you said like email, Instagram, and blog posts, and then I would say, what is your intention for each of those platforms? Like, do you sell through your email list? Do you try to generate leads on Instagram? Or are you trying to nurture people on Instagram? Is your blog to be super SEO searchable, or is it more for your inside community, right? And so then from there, you kind of have a direction of how you're already going to repurpose the main piece of content. And then I like to take it through different angles. So it's like, let's put an objection on this piece of content. Like this episode's a lot about content repurposing. So what's an objection people have about that? Or talk about a limiting belief or a myth or an inspirational story or a testimonial. And like, you just kind of take each piece of content's intention for the platform through the angle. It's like, it like filters. I need to make a graphic that like explains what I'm trying to say, you know, so you can see it. But once you like get to the angle parts, it's literally just like, you could just like slap on so many different sentences, because the way that we title our hooks, like, it's like, if you just change these words around, it's a completely different post now.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I like that structure that you have and kind of that visual. I know I can see it in my brain, so
Yeah, good. Because
I
I need
appreciate
to,
it.
I can see it in my brain, but I need to like make it a visual somewhere.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So I know you refer to yourself as like the unprofessional entrepreneur, like a space for unprofessional entrepreneurs. What does that mean? I would love to learn more about that.
I would say it started because when I lived in Mexico, I used to go on my Instagram stories in a towel straight out of the shower. And I also like never wore a bra because it was just hot all the time and humid. And people would be like, "Oh my God, like I could never do that. Like you have to look professional." And I'd be like, "I don't care if I look unprofessional. Like people are paying for my brain, not my wardrobe." And it just kind of like grew from there of like things that I do, things that I say, the way that I act, that I got like labeled as the unprofessional entrepreneur. And like now it's basically like my brand. It's the name of my podcast. It's I would like to make a clothing line one day, like nobody steal that. But yeah, like it's my personal brand, I would say, is the unprofessional entrepreneur.
That's so
Maybe
cool.
one day it'll be something more.
Yeah, I love that you were able to kind of like embrace that. And I'm sure when people find you, they really resonate with you because of that. Like, I do not get ready every day. There would be absolutely no way I could ever do that. I really like how you embraced that.
Oh, it took time. Like at first I like my whole body like couldn't get behind it, like nervous system wise. I was like, yeah, haha, like I'm unprofessional, but like I'm not gonna go out there and like announce myself as that, right? Like so it definitely took time to like actually step into the brand that I was becoming known for. Like I feel like the brand was almost built before I was ready for it.
Oh, that's very interesting. I like that you took that and created that into your podcast name. So tell us about your podcast.
It's currently on hiatus because it's wild right now with end of year. But there's 2 seasons out right now. It's called The Unprofessional Entrepreneur. We just have all sorts of different marketing entrepreneur style conversations. There are like guest interviews and there's a lot of solo episodes. I tend to like doing more of like case study type of episodes of like why I did something, like what worked, what didn't work. They're the ones that I've seen the best results with, so I keep doing them. But that's like the kind of things you'll hear on the podcast is like me just breaking down like different experiments I've run on my own business and like what happened.
That's cool. I like that concept. How do you promote it is it like a big part of your marketing for your business? Like, do you get clients from it? Or because I'm a podcast producer, so I love
Yeah.
talking about all things podcast. But what is the benefit that you see for your business?
I could not tell you if people find me through my podcast. I feel like people find me through like guest interviews like this more than through the podcast itself. But I find that the podcast helps with my conversions. Like people will come and say, like, oh, I listened to that episode, like turn 1 into 10. And it's literally the framework that I use for the remix. And then they'll buy the remix. So it's like the podcast episodes, maybe the way they're broken down, help people convert, but I don't think I have like the best SEO on it. I don't think I have the best visibility on it either, besides my Instagram and my email list.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like that. I think that it is really great for conversion because then you kind of build that trust with someone. And even though you call yourself the unprofessional entrepreneur, like the things that you're putting out there are professional. Your website looks great, social media looks great. So I like how that phrase can mean different things, just like that word can have different meanings.
Yeah, to me, like unprofessional being professional in the online space, especially, I mean, like we're so unregulated out here, but like it's really about looks when I use that word. Like I'm not saying that I like deliver my work late or like take people's money and rip them off. Like I run a real business, but like I will show up on stories in my towel.
I like that. That's just you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing I see on your website is this phrase, the sentence where it says consistency is getting you nowhere. Your audience might as well be made up of crickets. And
Mm.
going back to just like repurposing and putting out content, I hear a lot that like consistency is key. And it is for a lot of things, right? Like with a podcast, you need to be consistent with posting, you need to be consistent with showing up. But without a strategy, consistency really doesn't mean much. So I'd love to hear your perspective about what consistency really should be.
Yeah, I just feel like I held on to the belief probably through like all of 2022 that your audience just needs one more post. They just need one more post from you. You just need to do one more action and it's gonna happen. The things are gonna change, you know? And it was really like middle of this year, 2023, that I was like, consistency is kind of a lie. Everyone's out here being like, just stay consistent, just keep going, just one more post. And it's like, actually, I need to review my strategy. Actually, no one's engaging with my content, so like I should look at it, not just keep making more, you know? And it's like that rule with podcasting of like nobody makes it, or like I don't even know the percentage, maybe you do, like I don't know, like 90% don't make it past the first 10 episodes or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I started my podcast, I wrote out 10 episode names with like full outlines. I was like, I'm going to make my 10 episodes. And I made it, but I had like terrible listen rates and I like wasn't really promoting it. And I was like, why is no one listening to my podcast? Not a single person has come to me and said, I bought from your podcast, but I got 10 episodes.
Right.
And it's like, who cares if you have 10 episodes? Like nobody was listening. Like there's so much more like intention and strategy. And I think we get like blinded by the word consistency, that it's like that, just keep going, just keep going. And it's like, no, like stop and look at what you're doing. Like, is it working? There's no point to keep going if it's not working. It doesn't mean quit. It means like reevaluate.
Yeah. Do you have advice on how to do that? I mean, it is a moment where you have to really be honest with yourself. And sometimes that can be hard.
Well, yeah, like the first thing is be honest with yourself. But like I would say to look at your marketing foundations, which is your ideal clients, the offers you're selling, and the messaging you're using to sell it. If nobody is commenting on your content, like there's like something needs to change, right? Like, are you actually speaking to the clients that you want to be calling in? Is your messaging actually attracting and resonating with people, or is it like just getting skipped over? Is the offer that you're selling something that you're like proud to shout from the rooftops, or are you hiding it and never talk about it? And that's why no one's buying from you, because they don't even know it exists, right? Like if you can clearly get through all of those three things, then it's time to reevaluate the strategy of like what you're putting out there and like how you're showing up. But the first thing for me is the foundations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing is a lot of people just don't show up as their like true self in social media. And kind of like you were just saying, where it took time to coin yourself as the unprofessional entrepreneur. But I'm sure once you did, you were able to post more authentically and post more from your heart. Did you see a shift in your audience when that happened?
Oh, fully. Like the first season of my podcast was called Felly's Fishbowl, which was like a mastermind I ran in 2020. And I just like really loved that name and wanted to hang on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like the first season of my podcast was like so unaligned with like where my business was going, right? So then I think it was May, I like moved to France and I relaunched the podcast. And I released it as the unprofessional entrepreneur, and I started making episodes talking about like being unprofessional, like what it means, what it looks like, how to show up unprofessional. And all these people showed up in my DMs being like, this is so cool. Why have I never heard of this? I want to be unprofessional. I resonate with this. I feel so seen, you know? And it was just like an immediate reaction. And I have literally a case study episode on the show, on the podcast, talking about like rebranding the podcast and like how different it was from the launch of the first season to the launch of the second season.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go and listen to that. That's so interesting. I like that case study concept. I think that it's probably good for your audience to hear that, especially if they're like, oh, should I work with Felly? Or like, is this what I want to do? I'm sure those episodes really help them make that decision.
I would like to think so.
Awesome. Well, I've loved like all of the tips that you've shared today. Is there anything else that you want to share about content repurposing or marketing? I mean, we've talked about a lot, but any last tips that you have to share?
I mean, if you have never repurposed your content or you're just like simply not repurposing your content because you don't know where to start, then I would love if you checked out the remix because it is literally a taste of content repurposing. I will give you 100 ideas out of the content that you already have existing just so that you can just go start creating. But other than that, like it's not as complicated as it might sound. This is why I like to make graphics because I feel like it really just lays it out there for you. Like, oh, I just take this post, decide what platforms I want it on, and then come up with different pieces of content, right? For each one that like match the intentions of what I have, right? Like it is simple, but you need to put time in your calendar to do it.
Totally. Oh, there's one thing that I really wanted to ask you about. Hooks. Do you have advice for writing good hooks for posts? I think this is something that like comes easy to some people and it doesn't come easy
I
to
was gonna say I
some.
don't have a formula.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen like so many formulas out there, that people are like how X equals Y, like my client did X to achieve Y. Like those types of posts really do hook people in. It's not just like the gurus being like use these 10 hooks. Like no, they actually do stop the scroll because of the way they're laid out, like catch your eye so much. But at the same time, like I like to do anything that's maybe shocking, polarizing, unpopular. Like those are the kind of hooks that I generally go for. But it also depends, like again, coming back to intention, like are you trying to stop the scroll and generate leads? Are you trying to educate your audience? Are you trying to sell your audience? Like that will also affect the hooks that you're using. And also if it's an email versus if it's LinkedIn versus if it's in Instagram, like that will also again change it because it's like the things that you put in a subject line are very different than what you're going to put in a social media caption as the first line or as the text on screen or whatever it is that comes up first. So I personally do not have a formula. I just take my content through angles and write content that makes sense based off of that.
Yeah.
But I know there's like a lot of great social media managers or like Instagram marketers that have those 50 hooks to use or 100 hooks to use, and like they seem repetitive if you look at all of them again and again, but it's because they work.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense because you have your strategy in place. You know exactly what you want out of each post.
Mm-hmm.
I guess having that clarity probably does make it easier to write the post.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm sure your content writing background really, really plays a role in just like it coming easy to you. That's great advice. So, Felly, I would love it if you could share, and I ask every guest this, if you could share 3 action steps for the audience to take to move forward in the conversation that we talked about. So just taking everything and making it actionable. So just any 3 steps for the audience to take to move forward in their business.
I would say the first thing before anything, like you were saying, like that clarity can take you so far when it comes to creating content. So the first thing would be to look at your marketing foundations, look at your offer, look at your ideal client, and look at your messaging. And not through like do they like Starbucks, but like, do you like your offer? Do you like all of your offer? Is your offer a 10 out of 10? Do you want to yell about it? Would you sell it for a year even if no one bought, like knowing right out the gate that you were going to sell for a year to make one sale, right? Like would you keep going with that offer? If not, like it needs work. Same for ideal clients. Like could you talk to these people all day even if they weren't paying you? Or are you just targeting this audience because you think they have money? Like I'm not motivated by money, so maybe you are, but like I'm not. And then like messaging, like I actually did competitor research on my like one-on-one messaging, and I was like gutted to see how generic my old messaging was. It was like build a business that you love. And it was like I went to 3 or 4 different marketing mentors off of Instagram. 3 out of 4 had the same messaging. And it's like you're not going to stand out like that. Like rework it and just like keep trying it until somebody repeats it back to you. Like that's like with the unprofessional entrepreneur. Like I used to talk about being a peaceful rebel. I talked about like feel good business. But then when I said like, let's be unprofessional, everyone's like, oh. And when the people give you that reaction, you're like, okay, I've got my messaging and I'll keep this forever.
Totally. Just like finding what makes you stand out. I love those tips. Thank you so much for sharing those.
I'm glad.
Yeah. So where can people find you? And if they want to work with you, how can they reach out for that?
The easiest one is Instagram. I'm at Felly Day. It's just my name. And I'm on there way too much, but I'm getting better. But you can message me at any time. I do check my message requests in my DMs. Or you can check out my website, which is also fellyday.com, or my podcast, Unprofessional Entrepreneur, if you want to hear what's going on.
Awesome. I will put all of those in the show notes. Felly, thank you so much for joining me today. I learned so much, and I know the audience will as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.